I really think children's yoga is a great opportunity for yoga teachers to expand their offerings to more than just adults. And that gets me really excited because as yoga teachers, we all know the power and the benefits that yoga has in our lives. As yoga practitioners, most often it had a powerful effect for us personally, which really is why we follow the path of becoming a yoga teacher. And so if we think about the benefits that we have as adults practicing yoga, it's really exciting to think about offering those benefits to children. I always think, oh, I wish that I would have had somebody in my life when I was young who introduced me to yoga. I didn't really find a consistent yoga practice myself into much later into my adult life. And I think about the power that the practice of yoga had in helping me to manage my stress and anxiety and manage challenging times in my life. And it's been such a supportive practice for me that if we could introduce this to children at a young age, they are going to have those tools in their toolbox so much sooner than probably most of us found those tools. So that's what makes me really excited about sharing how you can expand your offering to children. So if we first just want to think about the benefits and then kind of relate that to how that's beneficial for children and families. As I just said, yoga gives us all those tools in our toolbox. And so when we are having a full toolbox of tools to help manage our stress and help us through challenging times, we of course can become more resilient. And that's really what we want for our children, especially now we see the rise in anxiety and mental health struggles in children. And so we really want to give them more tools to help them become more resilient, to help them be able to learn how to regulate their emotions and regulate their feelings and choose healthy ways to respond to situations. It also is an incredible way to give children a boost in their self-confidence. They learn that they can find their own inner tools and find that inner peace. And also they learn, what their body can do and how they can depend on their own inner body, like their breath and moving in what ways that feel good for them to help bring some calm and peace to their own life. And so that can be a powerful confidence builder. And then, of course, also we know that teaching children or teaching anyone meditation and mindfulness practices helps us to increase our focus and concentration. And in a world where we have so much stimulation and so much screen time and all of those things, children are struggling to be able to maintain focus. So introducing them to yoga and mindfulness is a great way that we can increase their focus and concentration. We can also help them with their impulse control. And we know that in building these mindfulness practices, it builds our own self-awareness. So for our children, helping them to become more self-aware also will increase their empathy and their kindness towards others. So that can be a really powerful effect. And then we also know that when we have increased empathy and kindness and the ability to help regulate our emotions and how we respond to situations, that leads to deeper connections with the people in our lives. So deeper family connections, deeper friend connections. And that's also something that's been really challenging over these past several years. We've noticed that kids are having a harder time connecting. We had a lot of time that they weren't able to connect. So we're rebuilding a lot of that. And those really young kids who weren't able to be around a lot of people because of the pandemic need to learn those skills of connection. So that's another really powerful benefit that yoga and mindfulness can bring families to deepen their connection. So you see that it's such a powerful tool that we think all children should have access to. So how can we make yoga accessible to children? So as yoga teachers, we are used to what our adult yoga classes look like. And if you are someone who hasn't really worked with children in any capacity yet, we have to first learn to set realistic expectations on what a successful kids yoga class looks like, because it looks very different than what a successful adult yoga class would look like. So, in an adult yoga class, we sort of have this build up, right, of our flow, and we build up to our peak pose, and we're building this energy in this slow way, and we build up to this peak pose, and then we're coming back down and coming back and ending in our shavasana. And that's sort of how the energy flow of an adult yoga class goes, and everybody can kind of feel that energy and feel that flow, and you can kind of get a sense of whether or not that was a successful adult class. However, for children's yoga, it's going to look very, very different in the way our energy levels are going to ebb and flow. So first of all, it's not going to be as quiet as an adult yoga class. So that's something to keep in mind, that it is going to be noisy. They may want to chat a lot. They often have a lot of questions. They want to tell a lot of stories. And so you have to learn some behavior techniques to help keep the class on track. And that's all things that we teach in a kids yoga training, but I'm going to go through some of those things today just to introduce you to a few tips. So that's something to keep in mind. It's definitely going to be a lot noisier than an adult yoga class. I talked about the energy level. So the energy level is going to rise up and fall in a kids yoga class in a much more consistent practice than in the adult yoga classes, that slow build and then we come down. We're going to be all over the map with our energy levels in a kids yoga class. You're going to be building them up with high energy, and then you're going to be bringing them down and holding some stillness, and then you'll be building that energy again and then bringing them down. You are working towards building them and releasing their energy so you can eventually get them to a successful shavasana. But there's going to be lots of variation in our energy levels throughout the time of the yoga class. Also, not all of the students are going to remain on their mats, and some of that's going to be intentional on your part as a teacher. There's games and movement activities that we are going to purposefully ask them to leave their mats. But also you're going to have just those kids who are going to wander off of their mats. They're going to come up to tell you a story and things like that. So you have to expect lots of movement throughout a kids yoga class, much more than off of the mat, much more than you would, especially in an adult class. Also, you're going to make a class plan just like you would if you are teaching an adult yoga class, right? You have your flow all planned out, and you're going to have your kids class all planned out. But when you are teaching kids, sometimes that class plan is going to have to go out the window. So being realistic and knowing that sometimes kids are going to show up and what you had planned is maybe not going to fit their energy level that day, or something's going to happen, or you're going to take a lot of extra time doing one activity that you didn't think was going to take so long. And so you're going to have to let go of something else that maybe you had planned to do during that day. So you have to be very flexible in your thinking when it comes to your class plans. And with the correct format, as I said, if you work their energy to the correct levels and you really give them an opportunity for lots of movement and releasing their energy, they will be able to find the stillness when you're asking them to. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, about how we can work with their energy level to make them be successful in finding some stillness. So we also want to meet them at their level. So a lot of this will have to do with familiarizing yourself with child development. And maybe you're somebody who hasn't really had any much interaction with lots of groups of different age children, or you don't have any background in child development. That's okay. But I do encourage you, if you're really considering teaching kids yoga, to do some research and to read some books or listen to some podcasts about child development, read some articles, and sort of learn what useful tips you can learn about child development and the appropriateness of certain things at different ages. So for instance, you're going to want to consider how long should classes be for kids. And that's going to vary depending on the type of makeup of your class and the age of the children. So if you're going to have a toddler class, most often you're going to want to have that class only be about 20 minutes. That's about their attention level that they could sustain in a toddler class. And this is without parents being involved. If they have a caregiver with them, then that's a little bit different, that you can extend that time. But just you and a group of toddlers, you're going to think around 20 minutes is going to be a good time frame. Preschoolers, we can up that a little bit to 30 minutes. And then we usually say for school age kids, about 45 minutes is a good time frame. And then those tweens and teens, they can build up to that 60-minute time frame. And thinking about their attention span, we know that, of course, the younger the child are, the less time they'll be able to stay focused on one task. So you want to also think about the time frame of your class, but then also what you're doing and your activities and how you're going to build up that class. So for the younger kids, you're going to have to vary your activities at a lot more faster pace than you would for older kids. So, they may only do an activity for 2 or 3 minutes before you need to switch it up and give them something else to focus on. So you're going to kind of play around with their ability to stay focused on one task. And it's going to even be different from within each age level. You'll have different groups of kids who seem to have a better attention span, and then you'll have groups that seem to have less, or you'll have a mix within one class, and you'll have maybe a few kids who could sustain their attention a little bit longer, but then you're going to have those other kids who can't seem to do that. And then that's kind of be how you're going to have to play with your activities and see if you can stretch some of those kids who are struggling to attain their attention just a tiny bit more, but then you're going to have to shift so that everybody can stay on task. And that takes a lot of practice. And the more you teach, the better you get at kind of reading the room and seeing when you need to change things up. Now, their physical development is also something that you really want to think about when you are thinking about teaching children's yoga. So we're going to talk a little bit about gross motor skills and fine motor skills, but just being aware that within each age range, there's going to be certain things that those children will be able to do based on their development. But even within that age range, like say 2 to 4 year olds, you're going to have a wide range within there of each child, what they're able to do. Every child is different. Every child develops their skills on a different pace. So, for example, I have 4 kids of my own. One of my children, he was walking by the time he was 10 months old. Another one of my children wasn't walking until he was 14 months old. That's quite a range in that age group and what they were able to do physically. So if you have a class of 2 to 4 year olds, you may have some 2 to 4 year olds who can be, up and following along and planning the motor planning as you're switching poses. They're able to emulate you and follow and switch those poses. And then you may have children who that's a little bit more of a struggle, and it takes them a little bit more time to get from one pose to the other because of their motor planning and how they have to figure out how to move their body to get into the next pose. So that's all something that you are going to have to be watching and paying attention to, so that you don't leave a child just getting into a pose and then you're quickly moving on to the next pose and they're not quite ready to move on yet. So you'll have to kind of really pay attention individually and as a group as a whole. But asana is a great way to help increase gross motor skills for kids. We know that, some of them are going to, like I said, be stronger in this area than others, but they can all help with, it's all helpful for them to increase their body awareness, their balance, their strength. Practicing those asanas are a great way to build those skills. What we really want to pay attention to is that their not looking a certain way. We're not really worried in children's yoga classes about their alignment. We're more worried, of course, that they're safe in a pose, make sure that they're in a safe position and they're not going to hurt themselves. But we're really more worried about focusing on bringing their attention to their own bodies and what that feels like for them, not necessarily what it looks like. Every child's going to look a little bit different in, triangle pose, and that's okay. Some kids are going to look more like the triangle pose that we may practice in an adult class, and some kids are going to look nothing like a triangle pose that we're practicing, and that's okay. What we want to do is call their attention to, oh, can you feel, your fingers stretching up in one hand and your other fingers stretching down towards your feet, and you're going to just draw their attention to their different body parts, because often kids don't have this body awareness of where their body is in space. So this really helps them to start to put it all together and feel where their body is and how they can stretch it in different ways. And when they move a certain way, how it feels different. And that's going to all help with their self-awareness. So just calling their attention to focusing on their own body and what that feels like. And then, as I already mentioned, we want to pay attention to that transition time, that motor planning for those kids. Some kids will be a little slower in the transition. So make sure you're aware of that and you're giving them time to get into the next pose. Now, fine motor skills is another area, and that's more of our fingers, how our fingers are working, and oftentimes that takes longer to develop than our gross motor skills. But some kids are better at fine motor skills than they are at their gross motor skills. They always say that when kids are developing, their body gets focused on one type of development first, and once it masters that, then it goes to the other one. So if they're really focused on their gross motor and they're really a kid who's really active in their movements and running around a lot and learning how to climb, oftentimes their fine motor skills might be a little lacking in the beginning, and they'll catch up once they've felt they have mastered their gross motor. They'll move on to developing their fine motor. So we can develop these fine motor skills in a yoga class in lots of ways. One of my favorite ways is one of the meditations that we love to teach at Kidding Around Yoga, and we use our fingers to do a 4-finger meditation. And so we're teaching the kids to tap their fingers on their thumb one at a time, and then we say a 4-word mantra. And the one we most often use is peace begins with me. And then we have them repeat that out loud 3 times. And then we have them whisper that 3 times. And then we have them say it quiet in their mind 3 times. And we use this meditation for all ages. And it's so great. The little ones, of course, can't quite tap those fingers yet, but that's okay. Even if they're doing 1 finger or they're going with all fingers at the same time, whatever it is that they can do, but they're going to keep building that skill of tapping those fingers. So that's a great meditation to do to build those fine motor skills. We also like to work with things like pom-poms for mindfulness activities. So picking up the pom-poms with their fingers one at a time is another great way that they can build those fine motor skills. And also practicing mudras is a great way to encourage working on their fine motor skills. We actually have a virtual workshop that focuses solely on teaching preschoolers mudras. It's a really great little virtual workshop that we have, which is our 90-minute virtual workshops. And I think that one's coming up in March. So you can check that out if you want to learn more about using mudras with preschoolers. And then let them explore any kind of that practice and build those skills as they grow, and they'll get better. And then they get really excited when they get that tapping down. So that's a little bit about child development. And as I said, I really encourage you to look more into how you can understand what is proper expectations for different age groups. Now we want to think about making yoga engaging for kids. So we want kids to have fun in yoga class because we want them to keep coming back. Of course, that helps our business if they keep coming back. But on a bigger scale, it's going to be something that they remember that they enjoy. So we hope that they keep coming back to yoga often throughout their whole life. It can become a practice that they take with them up through into adulthood, all the way through their life. And so we want them to really enjoy and have good feelings when they think about yoga. So how can we make it engaging and fun for kids? One of my favorite ways is by using music. It can make it so fun and engaging for kids. At Kidding Around Yoga, we have tons of songs. You can find some of our songs on Spotify, but we have lots of yoga songs. And all of our songs are so engaging because they encourage the kids to move their bodies in all different ways. We might be jumping and skipping and hopping and jogging in place, doing jumping jacks, lots of fun ways to move their body. And then we encourage some stillness by holding a yoga pose, practicing some breath work. A lot of our songs are reminding kids to take a big, deep breath in their nose. So they're doing this all while having fun. So we're getting the movement in, they're releasing some energy, we're getting some yoga poses in, they're finding some stillness, they're holding a yoga pose as the song is continuing, and they're practicing their breath work. So songs are a really great way to encourage all the practices of yoga. And you can incorporate any kid's songs in there. Like I said, Kidding Around Yoga has lots of fun yoga songs, but you can even just doing like a freeze dance to any fun song and play the music, let them dance around and jump and run. And then when you freeze the music, they hold a yoga pose, and they can, and then you maybe count to a certain number, or they take a certain number of breaths, and then you go ahead and you start the music, and then they can dance around again. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about some props that are also fun to use, because sometimes you're going to have kids that might be a little hesitant with the dancing around and big movements, and they might be a little bit shy or a little nervous. And so we can incorporate some props like scarves and things that can help them encourage their movement. You can also use stories. Yoga stories are great. There's so many different yoga books out there now that incorporate yoga poses, but you can take any story really and turn it into a yoga book. You can find stories that incorporate animals, and every time they hear that animal, they can get into that animal pose. So if there's a cow and a cat in there and there's a dog, they'll do downward dog when they hear the word dog. You can also assign different characters of a book yoga poses, so they can be listening for those yoga poses as you're reading the book, then they're getting into those poses. Another really fun way to incorporate stories, and I just saw a question pop up about middle schoolers, is to create our own yoga stories. And I love to do this with yoga cards. So you can buy a yoga card deck. We sell these in our shop, our K yoga cards. And you would pass out different cards that have different poses on them. And each child gets a pose. And then you're going to create a story together. So you'll go around the room, and when it's their turn, they have to give a sentence to the story that includes their pose. So this is sandwich pose. And so if it was my turn to tell the story, I would maybe say, I was so hungry, I couldn't wait to get home to eat my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And we'd all get into sandwich pose. Then it goes to the next person, and then they have to add a sentence with their pose. And we tell them it doesn't have to make sense. It can be silly and just a fun story. But I've worked with teens who love this exercise, and they actually get so into it. A lot of times they like to break up in pairs or in groups of 3 or 4, create a story, and then they present it to the class. and we all go through the stories together. And some of them like get so into it and they make these elaborate stories. I'm always so impressed with their imaginations and their creativity when it comes to creating their own yoga stories. So it's really a fun activity, then keeps them really, really engaged. And it's also great for practicing their writing skills, because they're having to write stories. So that's a really fun activity. You can also use guided imagery and guided meditations as a way to incorporate stories and to help children tap into that imagination. We call our Shavasana in Kidding Around yoga classes our peaceful garden. And during that time, when we're having the kids find some stillness, we're taking them on a journey, to all different places. Maybe we might be doing a guided meditation about walking through the woods, or a guided meditation about being on the beach. And during that time, we're calling attention to all their senses. Or what are the colors that you might see as you walk through the woods? What are the sounds that you might hear? And we're really tapping into their imagination and getting them to visualize, which is helping them to be focused on something, and so that they can remain in their Shavasana, in their stillness during that meditation. We have a Peaceful Garden ebook that is in our shop as well, that will give you a bunch of different scripts for these peaceful gardens and this guided meditation. So you can always check that out too if you need some more. If you need some more examples. All right, let's think about props for a little bit. Props are really, really fun to incorporate in our kids yoga classes. They're fun, they're really engaging, the kids love them, and it just makes it, makes them, like I said, really engaged. One of our favorite props to use is what we call the breathing ball, or you might know this as a Hoberman sphere. And this is a great way to engage them in their breath work. So we teach them to smell the flower as they breathe in. We open up the ball, and as we exhale, blow out their birthday candles. And the ball gets smaller. They love to use this. They love to pass this around. And even my tiniest little yogis in my class, my 2-year-olds, start to learn that breath on how to breathe in and breathe out. And this is a great tool to encourage breath work. There's so many other things we can encourage with our breath work, from pom-poms to pinwheels, bubbles, even just using our hands to blow out your candle, right? Smell your flower. So many different ways of engaging the breath. But that Hoberman sphere is one of our favorite little props. Another fun prop is just using little stuffed animals. And there's lots of different ways we can use this, from placing them on their heads to get them to sit up tall for meditation, to placing them on their bellies during Shavasana and telling them to, place it on their belly. And as they breathe in and out, their little animal's going to go up and down. They're giving their little animal a ride. That's again encouraging their breath work and also encouraging their stillness in Shavasana. So that's another fun prop. Of course, our yoga cards I already talked about. Glitter jars are really fun to use in your kids' classes. We use this for a lot of different things, even explaining. We have different ways we explain meditation to kids, so you can use this as part of that. But then just giving them a focal point to look at for their meditation. And sometimes you might just have one kid in the class who's having trouble staying still for the peaceful garden Shavasana, so we can just pass this off to them and let them lay on their mat, and it gives them a little focal point to help them to remain on their mat and stay still. I talked about pom-poms already. They're a great prop to use for lots of different things, but mindfulness activities and breath work. Also, other things that you probably already have, just a regular dice is always great to bring to class, and kids can roll the dice, and maybe you have different poses that are numbered 1 through 6, and whatever number they roll, that's the pose that they do. Or maybe when they roll the dice, that's the number of breaths you're going to count in that pose. I just saw somebody asked about, do I have props for everybody in the class? It depends on what the prop is. Most props, no. Pom-poms and things like that we're going to do creative mindfulness games with, yes. Scarves, as I mentioned before, these little scarves, yes, everybody will get their own scarf to play with and dance with and do maybe some partner work with. So everybody will get a scarf, but things like the Hoberman sphere and glitter jars, those things, we usually do not have one for everybody. Just the sheer mass of carrying all those supplies can get overwhelming. And then, but also it's really nice because like the Hoberman sphere, they all like to use this. And we use this as part of, or I often use this as part of like a closing circle activity where we'll take a turn and everybody will get to do one breath holding the Hoberman sphere, and then they pass it to their neighbor and it goes around the circle so that they get a chance to use it. But they all don't usually have their own. Those little stuffed animals, they do. I have a big bag of those. Sometimes I'll use things like these little butterflies to just place either on their bellies or on their forehead during our peaceful garden. Maybe we're doing a class about butterflies, or just as a mindfulness activity. I have a whole bunch of these that are all different colors and different patterns. So I'll put one of them in front of everybody's mat, and we'll just do a little mindfulness practice where they're looking at all the different colors on the butterfly. Let's see what other props. Chimes are really great. Using Tingsha chimes or singing bowls are great to use in your kids' classes. We do mindful listening activities with those. They're also just a great cue to use if the kids are off their mat doing an activity together, some partner work. Then when you ring your chime, they know to return to their mats. So those are really helpful to always have. Those are the kind of go-to props, I would say, if you're going to be just starting out, are a chime, a breathing ball, and some scarves. I would start out with those three props if I was just getting started. For virtual classes, I just saw that pop up as well. And yes, I've taught virtual classes on and off for the past 3 years. And lots of our activities and things that we've been talking about can be done virtually. Of course, props are difficult. If it's going to be a class that you're going to be holding weekly, you can tell the parents, give them a suggested list of props that you might want to have them have, and they have like a little yoga box and they keep that with their yoga mat. So every time they sign on for a class, they pull out their prop box, and maybe they have a scarf, and they might not look all the same, and that's okay. Whatever it is that they have, we can make use of. But most kids have little stuffed animals at home. Most people can come up with a scarf of something they have at home. As far as the Hoberman sphere or the breathing ball goes, oftentimes I will have my kids pretend to create their own Hoberman sphere. They'll hold their hands together, and when they breathe in, and then they breathe out. So they're creating their own breathing ball with their hands. The Hoberman spheres, you can find those on Amazon. We also sell them in our shop. But if you look up breathing balls in our shop, we have it. And then also, like I said, on Amazon, you can find them. Absolutely. All right. So let's see. Props. We went through props. Okay. So let's see. Finding stillness, which is always, we're working towards that goal, right? Working towards Shavasana at the end of our class, helping kids to find stillness. It's a practice. That's not a skill that we are all just able to do. Even for adults, sometimes it's really hard to find stillness. People struggle with that. So we really want to set our kids up for success in practicing the stillness. It's really, like I said, it's our goal of the class is to help them build up and release that energy so that they can get ready to find their Shavasana, find their stillness at the end of class. So make sure that you're allowing that time for that energy release and let them do lots of active things, moving their body, releasing their energy before you're asking them to stay still. Even when you're asking them to hold yoga poses, oftentimes we really need to let them move around, which is why like freeze yoga dance is really a great activity, because it allows them to move before you asking them to hold each yoga pose. But before we're going to ask them to sit in meditation, we're going to want to let them get movement in. Let them release that energy so then they can find that stillness and be able to sit. So we want to set them up for success, because we don't want them to feel like they are so uncomfortable fighting the need to move. And we don't want them to, two things. We don't want them to want to avoid finding stillness, which a lot of people end up doing, right? How often do you hear adults say, oh, I can't meditate, I can't sit still, I can't do yoga, I have too much energy, I can't slow down, right? We learn to like almost avoid finding stillness because we have this discomfort of our body wanting to move, and we're sort of fighting against that energy. So we want to set them up for success so that they feel good when they find the stillness. And the way they do that is by releasing the energy first. So they're not having that pent up energy that they feel like they want to move and we're telling them they can't, because that's also telling them to not listen to their body and what their body cues are telling them. And we don't want that either. So when they feel like they need to move, we want them to be able to move. So we give them lots of opportunity for movement and energy release. And then we can find those moments of stillness. And that's going to look different for everybody as far as like time length goes. And what you're going to do with that is, again, really pay attention to your students. As you're watching them, you're going to start to see in the beginning, there might be some movement, and sometimes like you're thinking, oh, this kid is not going to settle down, not going to be able to sit still during or lay still during Peaceful Garden, but usually there'll be some movement, and then they'll find it. They'll find that stillness, and then you're going to watch, and then you're going to watch as soon as you start to see them coming out of it, starting to see them wiggle or giggle, or, you know, try to reach over to their neighbor and start touching their neighbor. As soon as you see them started coming out of it, then you're going to end it. So it's the time length is going to vary for each age group and in each group really. And you're going to just look at your students for when that time is up and it's time to end that meditation. So pay attention to that. I saw somebody asked about special needs classes. And yes, sometimes special need classes you're going to want to pay attention to the different needs of those students. You're definitely going to want to slow transitions down. So for example, in some of our songs are very fast paced. And so we have slow versions of our Kidding Around Yoga songs because some of those kids need a little bit of a slower pace to move from pose to pose or active or movement to movement. So you might need to slow things down a little bit. Using lots of visuals like the cards is really helpful. Some of our special needs kids are good at looking at our modeling, but some of them do better looking at visuals like the cards in order to create a pose. Some of those special needs kids are going to be extra sensitive to sounds and different textures and different sensations. Oftentimes they're a little bit more sensitive to that. Like for example, I have both singing bowls and tingsha bells. My tingsha bells that I have tend to have a little bit of a higher pitch than my singing bowls. And I notice in my special needs classes, the singing bowl is received better than that higher pitched tingsha bell. For whatever reason, that sound is more tolerable when it's a lower tone for those students. So you're going to, again, watch and look and observe your students. And if something looks like it's not sitting well with them, then you're going to need to adjust. Sometimes we have to adjust the volume of our music. It might be too loud for some students, so we have to lower that volume of music. but props are really good for those kids as well. And sometimes I'll use like weighted stuffed animals for them to lay in Shavasana, like a weighted little stuffed animal on their chest or on their belly is helpful. Some of those kids really like to be covered up to feel like they have that safe space. So I will have, I have like little blankets that I'll use for some of those classes to help those kids to feel like they have that safe space. So those are just a few tips that you might want to consider if you're teaching a special needs class. All right, now I want to quickly get to where can we find these children and families to work with? How do we get access to this community? So there's lots of different places that you can go to. Of course, schools is a great place to reach out to. You might find better success at first going to the private schools. It might be easier to get in than public schools, but you never know. You can reach out to administrators in schools and ask if they want to offer a yoga program. Starting after school programs is a great option. Also reach out to either the home and school associations or the parent teacher associations, the PTA and the HSA. Oftentimes they have funds to provide programming for students. And so maybe they want to provide a yoga programming. I know that I was paid from a public school. I was paid through the HSA to come once a month and do cycle through the classes for yoga. And that it was paid completely through the HSA. Libraries is another great place. They offer free programming for their patrons. So they will pay the provider through the library budget. And right now I'm currently working with 4 libraries in my local area. Sometimes I go once a month, sometimes I go once a week. So it just depends on what the library is looking for, but you can offer mommy and me classes or caregiver and me classes there. I offer like preschool yoga. I also offer after school yoga for the school age kids. So libraries are a great place to reach out to. Recreation departments, also another place that might want to offer yoga programming. Youth sports, you can reach out to coaches and ask if they want to offer yoga classes for their teams. A lot of these youth sports are intense and they have lots of training, and a yoga portion as part of that training might be something that those coaches are looking for. Community centers, YMCAs, places like that. Any place where you might have a population of kids, daycare centers and preschools are a really great place to reach out. They'll offer yoga enrichment classes. So either the kids come and they stay after their school day, and you offer an extended time, maybe a half hour, 45-minute class, and then the parents come pick them up. Also special events like birthday parties and parent nights at schools might want to offer yoga classes for families. And so that's another great thing that you can advertise as offering special yoga events. You might even offer private sessions. I've offered, I'm working with a family right now who has 3 children, and 2 of those children were struggling with some anxiety stuff. And so I'm working with them as a family. So the mom, the dad, and the 3 kids, and I go into their home and I offer them a 45-minute yoga class as a private session. So that's also another option. And then the last one that I want to mention is Girl Scout troops and Boy Scout troops. Those are great organizations to reach out to see if they want to offer a yoga programming. The Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts are earning badges. So they might want to incorporate yoga as one of their badges that they earn. So those are, you can reach out to just local group leaders and see if they want to incorporate some yoga into their Girl Scout or Boy Scout troops. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. I think we have about 10 minutes left or so for some questions. And I saw some stuff coming up in the chat that I wasn't able to quite catch everything. So let me go back and see. I answered some things. So somebody said that she had a kid attend an adult class, and he just wanted to lay on the mat and do nothing. And you know what? Life is really overwhelming these days. Kids are inundated with lots of things, lots of activity, lots of stimulation. And maybe he just found that like to be a comforting place to be and not feel any pressure to have to do anything. So I guess not a bad thing if the parent wanted to bring him and you didn't mind him hanging out there. Oh, HSA stands for Home and School Association. So that's, some schools have home and school associations, some schools have parent teacher associations. It's just two different names for the parent organization that works with the school to provide programming for the students in that school. Let's see. Answered the special needs.
I can jump in here, Kelly. I noticed a question came in around, have development stages changed over the decades? Does what I learned in the 80s, is it still relevant?
So, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on development stages, but I am a mom of 4 and a former teacher. I would say that we expect a lot more of our kids today than was expected of us. There's a lot, I think personally, there's a lot more pressure on our kids to perform things faster than we did. Like if I think back to when we were, or me personally, when I was in kindergarten, we were still playing in kindergarten. It was really just about us learning how to be in the school environment. And we still had like kitchen area and pretend play going on. And that's no longer happening in most kindergarten classes. Like they're expected to be able to read by the end of the, by the end of the year, like by January, mid-year, they're expecting them to be able to read, and the pace is much faster. So, which makes it even more of a reason why these kids need things like yoga and mindfulness, because there is a lot of pressure on kids. And I feel like also the expectations, not just academically, but also the expectations of the extracurriculars are higher. Every sport now has a travel or a club team. And if you don't do this, that, or the other thing, you're not going to be able to play at the highest level. When you get to high school, if you didn't do this, sport all year round, you might not make the team. And so there's a lot of extra pressures on kids, both academically and physically. Yes, and trauma informed is important. Somebody just put up a comment about that. And so, yeah, you really want to be mindful. We do at Kidding Around Yoga, we have a trauma informed online course. That's amazing. So yeah, I would suggest definitely checking that out. You do want to be mindful and speak in, trauma informed language. We are never forcing our kids to close their eyes, for instance, or to be in any certain position, or feeling like they have to do partner poses and be touched by other people when they don't maybe feel comfortable with that. So, you always want to be aware of that. And from that perspective as well, like if you see a child is not participating, we don't want to keep drawing attention to the fact that that child is, we want to kind of meet them where they're at, as I said in the beginning. And so sometimes that can look like offering different things. Like if you're doing like a freeze dance and that child is struggling to get up and move their body, maybe they don't want people looking at them for whatever reason, You know, I always say, you know, and I don't say it directed at one child, I say it to everybody. If you just want to move your fingers really slowly, or wiggle your toes inside your shoes if they still have their shoes on, and give them other opportunities of how they could move their body more discreetly than maybe some of those kids who are up dancing wildly and don't care what other people think about, you know, what they're doing. So you want to be really aware of meeting all the kids where they're at, and definitely talking in that trauma-informed language for sure. Let's see. Okay, any tips on what to write when approaching libraries and scouts? You know, talking about the having a letter that talks about the benefits of yoga and what you could offer to their library, to the library patrons, or if you're gearing it towards the scouts, you know, offering, giving an example of, you know, the badge they might be working towards and how yoga could fit into, you know, a self care or wellness type badge, or healthy living, and then give them the examples of what you know, why that applies to that. And then, you know, the libraries, I have never gotten a no from a library, to be honest. They're usually really always looking for programming. So just, you know, explaining what kids yoga is, and kind of like, some people have never heard of it. So if they don't understand what that might look like, they might think like, oh, kids aren't going to want to do yoga. They're thinking of like an adult yoga class. So really explaining and helping them to understand what that program could offer, what opportunities for the kids to have, you know, mindful movement, and be able to learn how, you know, learn skills like breath work and meditation, and in a fun and engaging way. And you know, at the libraries, they always love it if you're incorporating stories and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And while you're reading a few more questions, I did want to mention that there is an offer that Kidding Around Yoga is offering to our community, and that is 40% off a online or in-person training. And it's not valid for the 95-hour advanced training, but it is available for the online in-person training. So we will be dropping that in the follow-up email, but the code is beYogi40. I'll just quickly drop that in the chat for you guys, but that's a really special thing. And thank you, Kelly and Kidding Around Yoga, for offering that to our community.
Absolutely. I see another question. Do you usually give potential employer a sample of your class? Yes, a lot of times I do, especially for schools. I will offer to come in and do a sample. So say I'm going into a preschool, I might go in and spend an hour there and do like 15-minute little sessions and have the kids, different classes, cycle through. That's helpful for a few reasons. It's helpful for the school to see what it's all about. And then it's also helpful because the kids usually love it. And then they go home and they tell their parents that they want to sign up. Because oftentimes those programs are going to be enrichment. So the parents are going to be signing their kids up and paying for that enrichment class. So it's helpful for the kids to experience it and like have a really, really good time. And then they want to sign up. So yes, I usually do offer some free classes if it's a brand new place that I haven't been before. And yes, somebody else commented about summer camps and rec programs. That's another great place to start offering your yoga classes. And sometimes it's just going into an already existing camp and doing one day of yoga for the whole camp, or going back weekly, depending on what they're looking for. All right.
And then just a quick note, again, this is recorded and will be sent out to everyone for you guys to view at your own leisure tomorrow. But I think, Kelly, unless you saw any other questions, you know, this was a really great presentation. I was taking notes as well, and I hope you guys all got out of it what I did. So thank you so much, Kelly, for joining us and joining the beYogi webinar series, becoming a host. With that, again, thank you, and we will see you guys all next time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
Alrighty, bye everyone.